現下の厳しい国際環境を踏まえ、大統領と私は日韓、日韓米の安全保障協力を含む戦略的な連携の重要性について一致し、これまでも具体的な協力が進んでいることを歓迎します。大統領と私は安全保障、経済安全保障を含む3カ国間の具体的な協力を持続強化していくために、一層緊密に情報を共有し、協力していくという意思を確認しました。
Since taking office, Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has championed a more proactive vision of Japan's foreign policy. She has stood firm and refused to bow to Chinese pressure. She explored options for more active regional security partnerships, and 7 months in, she has already visited key regional friends like the US, Australia, and South Korea. She has also received a state visit from President Marcos from the Philippines this month as well. So what is the purpose behind Japan's so-called shuttle diplomacy? How is Japan building an emerging architecture of regional partnerships to manage tension with China? And Japan has also been actively expanding military exchanges in East Asia and beyond, as well as easing restrictions on its defense exports. What could be the purpose and potential synergy from these new policies? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, everybody. I'm Wen Song. To join us tonight are our panelists. First, we have Athena Tong, Research Associate at CSRI and Visiting Researcher at the University of Tokyo RCAST. Ronan Fu, Assistant Research Fellow of Political Science at the Academia Sinica. Finally, joining us online is Daisuke Kawai, University of Tokyo Director and Project Assistant Professor of the Tokyo U's RCAST Economic Security and Policy Innovation Program. Daisuke, Ronan, Athena, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, let's jump right in. I think I'll start with Ronan for my first question. There is a recent phone call, of course, between U.S. President Donald Trump and Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Can you tell us about what significance it has and what does it say about U.S.-Japan relationship today?
Right, so for starters, I think the timing matters a lot. So Trump called Takaichi from Air Force One right after leaving Beijing. And Japanese officials, according to their source, Takaichi was the first leader Donald Trump spoke with on that flight. So for Japan, the nightmare will be a U.S.-China grand bargain that sidelines Tokyo. But the phone call basically provides like a briefing so that Takaichi can quickly get the information from the United States that Japan remains a very crucial actor in the U.S. security architecture in the Indo-Pacific. And I think Trump is sending a very clear signal that Japan will continue to play a very central role in terms of U.S. strategy in Asia. But we also should not overstate it. And here's the reason why. This doesn't mean that Japan gets a blank check. No, basically it's not like that. And it does not mean that Japan gets to control Washington's China policy. But it does show that U.S.-Japan alliance is the main platform that Donald Trump will continue to utilize. And it also shows that Japan, if it wants to continue to play an active role, like Takaichi already started, the U.S.-Japan alliance will continue to thrive. Yeah.
All right, that's important comments right there. And how about you, Athena? Do you see Japan today evolving to become America's primary Indo-Pacific security anchor today? Or is it more of a, third-party swing state in this bipolar rivalry between U.S. and China?
I would hesitate to say that Japan has become a swing state, just because Japan has been integrating more into alliance politics, especially regarding like-minded countries like the US, UK, etc. The goal ultimately is to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. So I wouldn't say that it's a swing state, even though Japan still has to leave room in its diplomacy, in its relationship with China, so that there will be still room for potential negotiation. It does not mean that it is really neutral, because Japan is, after all, a democratic country. So it has its own value-based diplomacy and supply chain concerns, I'd say.
All right, thank you for that, Athena. And I want to come to Daisuke, joining us online. Daisuke, what's your assessment about Japan's security posture today? And is it really evolving from a global economic powerhouse into more of a potent strategic player geopolitically as well?
Oh, yes, I think that is exactly what is happening. For many decades, Japan was seen mainly as an economic power, a country of trade, investment, technology, and development assistance. Those strengths remain important, but they are no longer sufficient in today's strategic environment. Today, Japan's diplomacy increasingly combines economics with security. So issues such as semiconductors, critical mineral, energy security, defense technology, cyberspace, supply chains, and maritime security are now central to Japanese foreign policy. So Japan is now abandoning its identity as an economic power, rather it is converting its economic and technological strengths into strategic influence. So that is a key transformation. Japan is moving from being mainly a global economic powerhouse to becoming a more active geopolitical actor.
All right, so we're talking about Japan's coming out, isn't it, in the security posture. And Rona, you want to add
Yeah, so
something?
just like one sentence. Basically, I want to emphasize that actually transformation, the entire transformation that he just described actually began before Takaichi. I think Abe actually laid the foundation and Takaichi accelerates the entire process.
All right, important points right there. And how about you, Athena? When it comes to, I guess, Japan taking a more important and prominent security role in the region, one important neighbor too, of course, is South Korea. And so we know there are some lingering feelings between the two sides, Japan and South Korea. How do you see that being managed in more recent years? And is it going to be an obstacle to Japan playing a more active role?
I mean, we have explored a little more with this relationship, given the trilateral agreement established between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan during the Biden era, actually. However, with the U.S. changing posture in the region, it relies a little bit more bilaterally between South Korea and Japan. And we see actually Prime Minister Takaichi getting along quite well with President Lee, as seen during the visits in last year and the continued shuttle diplomacy between the two countries. However, I'd say that it's important to establish mechanisms on the working level and not just rely on leader-level chemistry or like a willingness to work together, because leaders do change in countries. Politics change and dynamics change. So we have to make sure that this is actually ingrained in the very basis of the entire mechanism that makes these two countries work.
All right, important points right there. Going beyond personal level connection, more about institutionalizing those cooperation mechanisms. I want to come back to Daisuke online about Takaichi administration, particularly there's been a lot of focus, of course, about how she's playing an active role on the personal level. She gets along, she played drum with other visiting dignitary as well. So this idea of rebranding Japan under Prime Minister Takaichi, can you walk us through that?
Well, Prime Minister Takaichi has both a symbolic and a strategic significance, I would say. Symbolically, as Japan's first female prime minister, she brings international visibility. But politically, her conservative profile also sends a message that Japan is prepared to take national security more seriously and assume a greater responsibility in the region. That said, Japan's international credibility does not come only from the being tough, but it comes from stability, the rule of law, technological capabilities, economic reliability, and the ability to work with a wide range of partners. So the challenge for Takaichi is to combine fineness with reassurance. So she needs to show the resolve towards China and North Korea, while also reassuring neighbors that Japan's goal is not militarization, but deterrence, stability, and preservation of the rule-based order. So if she can balance those two elements, Japan's diplomatic image could become much more proactive and influential.
All right, thank you for that analysis, Daisuke. So I want to talk about two other important players in the region, and those are, of course, China and Taiwan. Now, last October, Prime Minister Takaichi remarked in Parliament that a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency. It sent China-Japan ties into a deep freeze. Beijing has virtually suspended official exchanges with Tokyo, while repeatedly issuing stern public warnings and holding military drills even to pressure Japan to walk back those same remarks. Watch.
日方最应当做的是尽早纠正涉台错误言行，停止再军事化的狂飙突进，回到睦邻友好、和平发展的正道上来，以实际行动 取信于亚洲邻国和国际社会。
All right, so a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency too. This, of course, Ronan, as you mentioned earlier, is something that started under Abe, the previous Prime Minister of Japan. But how do you see Takaichi taking that rhetoric into now a more robust policy framework?
Yeah, so I think it is becoming operationalized. I mean, making your Taiwan contingency as part of the Japan contingency plan, but it hasn't really actually turned this rhetoric commitment into like a treaty level or like a formal commitment. Mm-hmm. So we should say that. But everything basically is moving toward a direction that is in favor of both Japan and Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Because by entertaining the possibility that, when Taiwan is under assault, this is actually like an assault to the Japanese national interest. Mm-hmm. So Japan will actually try to do something, or even better, Japan will actually get prepared for any contingency plan that include like blockade and things like quarantine, things like that. So it's like it's not just like a crisis management or like after the outbreak of the war, Japan will intervene. It's like when trying to do something beforehand so that we can actually minimize the possibility of a Chinese invasion or Chinese blockade. So Japan is doing its part. So right now, what we're seeing is that starting from Abe and now, basically continuation from Takaichi, Japan is trying to working under the table so that, this situation can be under control. Yeah.
All right, important groundwork being done here for, I guess, conflict prevention and dissuasion in the longer term. How about you, Athena? When you look at this Taiwan contingency equal Japan contingency rhetoric, one thing people point to, of course, is increasing military deployment in southwestern Japan, Kyushu and beyond, Okinawa and what have you. How do you see these new changes reflect a meaningful shift in terms of Japan's recognition of the security interdependence between between Japan and Taiwan?
So I think you point to a really good point in that Tokyo did not actually voluntarily militarize themselves, so to say. It is actually a reaction to changing dynamics in the region because we have a very aggressive neighbor that is the PRC, and they are ramping up threats to not only Taiwan, but also Japan. And intrinsically, the southwest islands of Japan and its security is lined up with that of Taiwan. There is no effect or threat to one without causing any ramifications to the other. And therefore, being along the first island chain, it is important for Japan to be addressing its homeland security. But by extension, that also becomes for Japan, from China's perspective, a change in posture when it actually isn't a change in posture. It has always been this way. It's just a response to changing regional dynamics. Even if it comes to the more kinetic side of things, it's not actually that aggressive. It really is just protecting its own region, especially given that since the remarks of Takaichi in November in the Diet, as you mentioned earlier, we have seen a ramping up of aggression from the PRC, whether it be on the maritime side or the airspace side along the southwest side of Japan.
Yeah.
All right, Ronan, you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to actually piggyback on Athena's very good point by adding that, basically when you examine Japan's military strategy, basically the military logic is actually denial. So it has nothing to do with aggression or, actually militarize Japan into something great. No, it's just like denial so that, Japan is trying to actually complicate, Beijing's planning before a crisis even begins.
All right, that's great distinction there into the deterrence theory by denial versus by punishment, as we expect from Ronan, of course, our great political scientist in-house. That's great. So that, again, Taiwan contingency equal Japan contingency point. What's your assessment of it? And is also Prime Minister Takaichi running into any kind of pushback politically as well as central or local levels?
Well, first of all, I also want to echo the two speakers mentioned and also strongly reject the idea Japan is seeking to destabilize the region. Japan is not trying to change the status quo across the Taiwan Strait at all. Japan is not advocating Taiwanese independence, and Japan is not seeking conflict with China. But Japan cannot ignore the strategic reality that any major crisis around Taiwan would directly affect Japan's security. So this is a matter of geography, not ideology. So my question for Japan is not whether Taiwan matters, but the question is how to prevent the crisis from happening that requires a credible deterrence, close coordination with allies and partners, and open channels of the communication with China. So Japan's policy should be understood as a defensive, as everybody talked about, and the preemptive. It is about avoiding war, not preparing to start one. And when it comes to the pushback regarding the domestic politics, so there are several layers to the pushback. At the national level, opposition parties are some parts of the public worry that Japan is moving too quickly toward a more militarized posture. There are also concerns about the constitutional constraints, fiscal cost, and whether Japan could be drawn into a US-China conflict. At the local level, the concerns are even more concrete. Communities in Okinawa and the southwestern island worry that the stronger military deployments could make them frontline targets in the regional crisis. They also worry about the burden of hosting military facilities and the impact on daily life. So Takaichi's administration needs to do two things. First, it must explain that these measures are defensive and necessary to protect the local residents. The second, it must invest in local resilience, evacuation plans, shelters, infrastructure, medical capacity, or communication systems and economic support. So in other words, deterrence cannot be only about military hardware, but it has also to include public trust and the local protection.
All right, I think those are important points there. There's naturally concern about budget, concern about entrapment in conflict, but the way forward is to make sure you make the right investment, both hardware and software, right? Isn't it? I want to sort of zoom out a little bit and look at the regional picture. So beyond its intensified diplomatic outreach to Pacific nations, Japan has also been steadily adjusting its own defense policy as well. And this includes easing restrictions on arms exports, expanding military infrastructure in the southwestern islands, and taking part for the first time in joint military exercises with the US and the Philippines. Collectively, these moves signal a more active approach to defense cooperation and regional security engagement with partners as well. Watch.
Secretary Teodoro and I signed today statement on the further promotion of defense equipment and technology cooperation. We also agreed to move forward with discussions aimed at realizing comprehensive equipment cooperation, including education and training, maintenance and sustainment, operational coordination, information sharing, and the proper management of transferred equipment, with a view to the early transfer of Abukuma-class destroyers and TC-90 aircraft.
All right, Athena, one important topic here, of course, is intensifying Filipino-Japan security cooperation lately. Can you tell us about the story and the significance of it?
Well, Wenty, as you know, the Philippines and Japan stand on two ends of the first island chain, and therefore, should there be a Taiwan contingency, these two countries' response will be paramount. It's very important regionally, and therefore, actually, between the Philippines and Japan in 2024, they already had an agreement, and it came into place late last year, the reciprocal access agreement, so that this sort of joint exercise or joint action is actually legislated. There is proper procedure, and we know what each side is responsible for, how we're going to go about it. And along with the U.S., of course, there is an alliance going on with U.S. bases in Okinawa, for example. How would they be deployed should there be a contingency? And how legislatively or legalistically this works when, for example, a Filipino military is on Japanese land, and vice versa should the Japanese self-defense forces be in Filipino region or within its parameters, how it should act. So this is actually just a manifestation of what has already been discussed. So in that, I think these countries who are party to the joint exercises, they already understand the significance of a collaboration regionally should these three forces work together. And together they deter, hopefully, the malign actors within the region, including China, by extension, Russia, but I think more pertaining to our region for now, it would be China.
All right, thank you for that. Oh, yes, Roland.
Yeah, so I just want to add that basically presents like a operational architecture that she just mentioned. So it means more access, more interoperability, more maritime domain awareness, and the more anti-ship capability. So it's sending a very clear signal to Beijing that if you continue doing what you have been doing, that's going to trigger regional coordination and cooperation.
All right, thank you for that, Roland. And Daisuke, I think similar question to you as well. In terms of this new development, in terms of U.S., Japan, Philippines, joint military exercises, as well as broader acceleration in Japan-Philippines security cooperation in general, can you evaluate the significance of potential synergy going forward?
Actually, this is an important development because Japan's security role is expanding beyond the immediate defense of Japan. The South China Sea, East China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait are strategically connected. So if coercion succeeds in one maritime domain, it affects the deterrence in other areas as well. So Japan's participation in the US-Philippines exercises show that Tokyo is increasingly willing to support wider regional security network. So Japan can contribute through maritime domain awareness, capacity building, Coast Guard cooperation, equipment transfer, training, and interoperability. For the Philippines, Japan can provide practical support. For the United States, Japan's involvement helps create a more network deterrence architecture. So this is not a formal NATO-style alliance, but it is a practical coalition designed to prevent the unilateral change to the status quo by force.
All right, thank you. And Daisuke, while I have you, I want to ask a follow-up question as well about one other important development, and that is April 2026 this year, when Japan lifted bans on a number of arms exports policies. They used to restrict arms exports, just 5 categories: rescue, transport, warning, surveillance, and minesweeping. Now they're expanding it to a greater diversity. Can you walk us through that and the meaning of it?
The easing of defense export restriction is not simply about selling weapons. It reflects Japan's recognition that the modern deterrence require a strong defense industrial base. The defense cooperation is no longer only about soldiers and the platform. It is also about production capacity, maintenance, ammunition, spare parts, technology sharing, and the supply chain resilience. So Japan also wants to deepen defense cooperation with trusted partners. So if Japan can provide equipment, maintenance, training, and technological cooperation to countries such as Philippines, Australia, the United States, and European partners, it can contribute more directly to regional stability. Of course, Japan must manage this carefully. Transparency, end-use control, and democratic accountability are essential. But strategically, this is a part of Japan's broader shift from a passive security posture to a more active contribution to regional deterrence.
All right, thank you, Daisuke. Roland, I guess more broadly speaking, how do you see U.S.-Japan alliance significantly evolving? We used to talk about maybe it's a cork in a bottle, maybe more of a eggshell that incubates a more assertive Japan. Has that debate ended for you?
Now the U.S.-Japan alliance basically serves as a facilitator for Japan to actually take a more active role in building the regional security architecture. And it's an inconvenient truth that sometimes countries in the region, they were uncertain about the U.S. security guarantee. So right now we actually see Tokyo taking a more active role. So sometimes in a way you could even entertain the possibility that sometimes Tokyo is trying to fill a void led by President Trump, right? So anyways, the bottom line is that right now we should see, or we should deem the U.S.-Japan alliance as a way to actually empower Japan to do the right things. When, like I said, when the parameters of the security situation, security environment changes, Tokyo and Washington, they ought to figure something out so that, even there was a debate, we have to actually somehow just assuage the domestic backlash and sometimes international opposition so that, we can focus on the right thing, keep cooperation going. Yeah.
All right, any final comments from you, Athena?
I mean, I agree, of course, with what Ronan has said, that the cork in the bottle is more of a post-war posture. And right now, the emphasis is not on deterring Japan from exercising defense. It is actually the concern that should there be a contingency in any form in our region, that partners who are more leaning towards the democratic side might not be able to react in time. So if anything, it is important for Japan to step up and, as you have said, fill the void, to ensure that if anything happens, that we have parties that can be trusted within the region to react and to ensure that there is humanitarian aid that is available region-wide.
Thank you. And Daisuke, any final thoughts from you?
I would say the key phrase is managed interdependence. Japan will not cut off the economic ties with China, but will make those ties more selective and security conscious.
Thank you, Daisuke, for that for that comment to end on. All right, that's about all our time tonight. So I'd like to thank you, Ronan, of course, Athena, and Daisuke. Thank you all for your time and your insights today. Cheers. All right, that's our show. I would like to thank you, viewers at home, for tuning in. Come check us out on YouTube. And until next time, it's good night from us from Taipei.